Africa or Central America, you'll kind of see this major difference in the cities versus the rural villages and communities. In the cities, they'll usually speak a European language. It's the one that everybody knows. But once you move outside of the cities, in the more rural areas, they speak the tribal languages. And that's kind of what's going on here. They probably know Greek. Some of them probably know Latin, but they're speaking their local language. Really kind of similar to, even some of us today, it's probably one of those things where, the grandparents, they might only speak Lycaonian. But then the younger people, they start speaking more of the European, more of the Greek language. But it kind of shows you this is a rural area. It's a little bit different than some of the cities that he's been visiting, a little more off the beaten path. You can see here they're literally cavemen. Part of the city was cut out of rocks. So it's a pretty neat place. But these people, because they're a little more disconnected from city life, the approach to missions here is a little bit different. Up to this point, anytime they go into a new city, they start in the synagogue. But here it doesn't start in the synagogue. And there's probably two reasons for that. One is maybe kind of symbolic of, hey, our mission is moving from Jews to Gentiles. That's part of it. But then the other part is it's probably such a small rural town. It's so far from Israel. It's so far from the central hub of Judaism that there's not a synagogue there. And so Paul just kind of comes in and he kind of makes this big splash. He sees this guy wanting to be healed who couldn't even walk from birth, and he heals him. And this causes a scene in the town. Everyone thinks that they're gods. Barnabas is mistaken for Zeus, which is a little flattering. Zeus is big and buff, and that kind of says something about maybe what Barnabas looked like. Paul, on the other hand, is mistaken for Hermes, your God, but if you see pictures of Hermes, he's usually a baby with wings. I wouldn't want to be mistaken for that guy. But it's interesting here that these are people seeing this. It's a different kind of Gentile. Before this, the Gentiles that they were converting and working with were actually Gentiles who were really interested in Judaism. They were actually really interested in Yahweh God. They just weren't ethnically Jewish. These guys we're seeing, they're a totally different breed of Gentiles. They don't know Yahweh God at all. They don't know anything about Judaism. They worship gods like Zeus and Hermes. So we're talking about a different group of people. But there are really some important ministry and mission lessons here that you can see. And I think this is important. Paul comes in and he doesn't just bust out scriptures and start saying like, hey, let's have a Bible study. He doesn't just come in there and start knocking them over the head and being like, hey, stupid, you shouldn't be worshiping this God. Or he doesn't come in and just start saying, hey, let me show you how you're sinning. He comes in compassionately. He comes in meeting these people where they're at. And you can see that throughout this whole scripture. He comes in and serves. He finds someone, he sees a need, he meets them, and he heals them. And he shows that, and in doing so, he shows this display of God's power. So he came in and he addressed a physical, present, earthly, bodily need. And then he used that as a gateway to address a spiritual need. So, something that we see a lot in missions, it's sometimes almost this debate in missions, is, I've heard it a lot, and it's a voice that we need to hear, is, hey, I see that we're serving these people. I see that we're feeding them, or I see that we're doing this medical mission trip, or I see that we're providing all these services. But we got to teach them the Bible. We got to get them baptized. We got to get them dunked. We need to be having Bible studies with them. And look, that's good. That's a voice we need to hear, because I think sometimes we can overemphasize. We just start serving, and we never really get to telling them about Jesus. So that's a voice we need to hear. But it's so important, though, to balance this out, because we don't want to neglect the earthly, material, now issues. We need to care about these things, and we need to show people that we care about these things. So it's good to feed them. It's good to have the blessing box. It's good to go on these mission trips where we're medical missionaries. And if you think about it, Paul was being a medical missionary here. And he was just following steps of Jesus like we were talking about. He was just doing what good to do that. And I think it's really important as we think about wanting to be the hands and feet of Jesus in this world, is we need to show people there is a God and his people. There are these people that care about you now. They care about your needs now. They care about your hurt now. You're not just a number. You're not just someone we want to get dunked and baptized and check a box and feel good about ourselves. Yeah, we care about your salvation. We care about where you're going, but we care about your hurt now. We care about your plight now because there's a God who cares. And when you do that, and when you show people, hey, I love you and I care about you now, they're going to be a lot more likely to want to hear what you have to say. They're going to be a lot more likely to want to have that Bible study with you. And so I think that's an important thing we need to know in missions is we got to balance this out. It can't be all teaching and it can't be all service. You need both. And when they work, and when you put them together, you're more likely to find more room, to have to make more space at the communion table. But it's interesting here. As soon as Paul heals this guy, they're hailed as gods. And there's really even some irony or maybe even humor in this, that the priests of the temple of Zeus are coming and trying to sacrifice to God's people. What a wild turn of events. That's crazy. It's kind of funny. God, not even God-fearing Gentiles, straight up Gentiles, see what these guys are doing and say, hey, I want to be a part of it. And there's also some irony in that God's people, up until this point, God's people oftentimes refuse to believe. They refuse to listen to the teachings of Paul. But here you have these guys that they know a miracle when they see one, and they're ready to jump on board. Something we don't talk a lot about in missions and in ministry is that there is a power that comes with it. There's a power that comes with church leadership. There's a power that comes with missionaries, and it can easily be abused. And here, Paul and Barnabas, they kind of give us the example of how you should play that. Because it could have been tempting to be like, dude, Barnabas, they think we're gods. Dance, monkeys. Give me money. You could exploit this in a lot of different ways. But they said, no way, we're not going to do that. We're not going to exploit our power. And so Paul immediately turns that glory that's given to him back to God. Because to Paul, it's not about Paul. It's about God, and he wants to give glory where it's due. I've seen foreign missionaries, especially in like kind of third world countries, in Africa and in Central America again, where they come in with this American money and this American power, and it's really easy to use that power. Man, they have a lot of say. They have a lot of control, and it's really easy to abuse that power. And I've seen it happen. We've seen it happen. And it's sad, but it's also the people abusing that power. I don't think they were bad people. I think they're good people. I think they were well-meaning. But once they go there and get all that power and see what they can do, it can, absolute power corrupts, absolutely. And so there's some danger there. And that's something that we need to be aware of, not just in missions, but for me as a minister. And for you people as church leaders, that we have some sway. We have some power, we have some authority, and we should never make it about ourselves. Never make it about us getting our own way or pushing the church in the way we want it to go or doing what's best for me and what's best for mine. And then as a minister, it should never be this therapeutic thing. I think sometimes a lot of really anybody in the public, they can make these things about them and building themselves up in some way, and it's so important to keep that in check. That what we do as ministers, what we do as church leaders should elevate God, even if that's to my detriment, even if that's to our detriment. So we need to make sure in any form of ministry, missions, and outreach that it's about elevating God and not self. And maybe stop and even think, do I have ulterior motives here? Where's my head really at? And the last thing I really want to point to here, I think is really cool, is Paul's brilliance and compassion and understanding. He basically says, I'm not God, but God has always been here. You kind of know him. Even though you don't, you kind of know him. There's evidence of him everywhere. He's the one who gives rain and crops. He's the one who fills your bellies. He's the one who takes care of you because he's a compassionate God. He's the author of joy. When you feel joy, it's him. Well, he's an apostle. He has this special relationship with God. He's humble enough to know he doesn't have a monopoly on God. And that's important in missions. That's important when we share faith. We don't have a monopoly on God. He knows he isn't bringing them God. God's already there. He's just pointing him out. And so that's something so important in missions. No, God's already there and working, and we need to just find him there and meet him there. And he points at him through the rain and the crops, which, again, this is being very aware of his audience. This is a rural, agriculturally minded audience. And so he's speaking to them in ways they'll understand. He does something similar in Athens. He knows, hey, these are people. I noticed you have all these different gods. I saw the one to an unknown God. And he connects that with Yahweh God. It's really some interesting strategies of just seeing where God is, seeing where their culture's at, and making those connections. No need to reinvent the wheel. No burden of feeling, well, without me, God wouldn't be here. Paul doesn't have that arrogance. He knows God's working there. Paul knows God is present and working, and he's just connecting the dots there. Now, unfortunately, for Paul and Barnabas, they have some success here, but the Jewish leaders from other communities, likely there's not a lot there, sway the crowd. And they stone Paul, attempting to kill him, but because God's on Paul's side, he doesn't die. And, I should just say this briefly, is sometimes the Bible, especially John, but also Acts, sometimes sounds very anti-Semitic. You read it and you're like, did Kanye write this? And it sounds bad. And you can interpret it in a way that can be very anti-Semitic. But here it's not Jews that are bad. And it's not because they are Jews. It's not because of their religion. It's not because of their ethnicity that they're the antagonist. It's because they're unwilling to change. It's because they're unwilling to hear a new word from God. It's because they're unwilling to give up their power and their privileges and their comforts and their traditions. That's why they're antagonists here. It has nothing to do with race. And that's important to note here. And we kind of need to think, well, do I kind of relate with them? Am I kind of unwilling to give up traditions or history that I love? Am I unwilling to see the flaws in myself? Am I unwilling to change? Am I unwilling to submit? Because that's really why they were the antagonists here. And I'd also like for us to sympathize with, because I see a lot of me when I see these guys. But to these guys, Paul and Barnabas were taking Judaism, something that makes them who they are, something that's a part of their history, a part of their identity, something that they love, and they were twisting it and changing it. In the Jewish perspective, they were twisting it and changing it into something very different and something in their eyes very wrong. Is there any country fans in here? Any country music fans? Like it's even a question. And I won't make you raise your hand for this one, but those of you country fans, are there any of you who are inherently offended by rap country, by bro country? Yeah, Sharon's like, yes, boo. Well, to the antagonistic Jewish people here, Paul was doing to Judaism what Florida Georgia Line do to country music. It's offensive, right? You want to fight this. They're taking something great and messing it up. And so I can kind of relate with that. I can kind of see where they're coming from, and maybe to see some of that in ourselves. So sometimes we want to combat anything new or different or change. And that's kind of why they were doing that. But as we wrap up this first missionary journey, and as we wrap up Missions Month, I want to encourage you to remember, look, missionary is not someone you pay to send to another country. It's you. You are the one doing the outreach. You are the boots on the ground of missions. And I want you to know, and I think a lot of times when we hear that, we're like, no, not me. No, God can use you wherever you're at. And you don't have to be a Bible scholar, And you don't have to be a perfect Christian to do it. Those are the two reasons. Those are the top two reasons that people say, that's why I don't share my faith. I don't know enough, and I'm not a good enough Christian. Look, we're all hypocrites. Let's just be hypocrites and share our faith anyway. And then the other thing is I want us to be people who are open to God. Because like I said, there's some opponents in here in Acts. They're opponents of God because they are not open to him working in any new ways, in any different ways than what they thought. They have God in this box, and Paul and Barnabas are coming and kind of pulling God out of the box, and they're saying, no, you can't do that. God doesn't work in that way. God can't work through those people, or God can't be present in that way. We need to kind of take a step back and say, no, Acts says it can. Acts says God is present in these things. So let's be careful to not combat what God is doing, to not quench the Spirit, and to not be an opponent of God. Because sometimes it's God's people who kind of end up being the opponents. And then last, I want you to realize that whether you feel it or not, whether you can identify it or not, God is working. God is present. God is moving. And seek him and find it and just name it. Speak it, name it, meet him there, and join him there. If you're here this morning and you want to give your life to Christ, or if you need prayers, we want to invite you to come now. As together we stand and sing.